Montana winter, 1923. The cabin sits against the hillside like it grew there stone and earth, and 50 years of weather pressed into something that looks more natural than built. I stand at the doorway with my grandson Michael beside me, 16 years old, and angry at the world the way only 16 can be angry. His father wants to send him to factory work in Butte, says the boy's trouble won't amount to anything. Same thing my stepfather said about me. I place my hand on the doorframe. The wood is smooth under my palm, worn by half a century of coming and going. Michael doesn't know why I brought him here. Doesn't know what this place means. Doesn't know it saved my life 3 times and might save his now. Sit down, I tell him. He sits on the bench near the old cachalofen, the massive stone chimney that takes up a quarter of the cabin's interior. Even now, with just a small maintenance fire burning, the stones radiate warmth you can feel from 6 feet away. Before you decide to give up on yourself, let me tell you a story about this cabin. He looks around unimpressed. Just an old man's house to him. Just stones and timber and dirt walls. This cabin, I say, saved my life 3 times. The first time I was 17 years old and had 48 hours left to live. Michael shifts on the bench. I can see it in his eyes. He thinks this is going to be one of those grandfather stories, the kind old men tell to feel important. But I didn't bring him here to feel important. I brought him here because he needs to understand something about what a man can build when the whole world throws him away. November 14th, 1873. The Bozeman Trail cuts through Montana territory like a scar, and our wagon train had been following it for 3 months. My stepfather, Jacob Brennan, owned 6 wagons, made his money hauling supplies to homesteaders, and he ran those wagons like a tyrant runs a kingdom. My mother, Catherine, had married him 9 years earlier after my real father died. I was 8 then, didn't have much choice in the matter. By 17, I'd learned everything there was to know about wagon wheels. My father, before he died, had been a wheelwright, left me his manual, 200 pages of technical drawings and notes on wood selection, spoke tension load distribution. That manual was the only thing I owned that mattered. Everything else Jacob provided, and he never let me forget it. We had 2 little girls in the family, Ruth 12, Mary 9, Jacob's daughters from his first marriage. Good girls, but Jacob kept them ignorant on purpose. Said education ruined women, made them uppity and useless. But I remembered my father teaching me to read from that manual, remembered how knowledge felt like power, and I couldn't watch those girls grow up stupid just because their father was afraid of smart women. So I taught them, used my father's wheelwright manual. Taught them letters first, then words, then whole sentences about ash wood and oak and the mathematics of a wheel's circumference. They learned fast, the way children do when you don't tell them learning is supposed to be hard. Jacob caught us on November 11th. Ruth was reading aloud about spoke tension when he pulled back the wagon canvas. I can still see his face, not angry at first, worse than angry, disappointed like I'd confirmed something he'd always suspected about me. "I've fed you for 9 years, he said. His voice was quiet, the quiet that comes before violence. Clothed you, given you work, and this is how you repay me, making my daughters think they're better than they are. I should have stayed quiet. At 17, I hadn't learned yet that sometimes silence is smarter than truth. Reading doesn't make them think they're better, I said. Ignorance makes them worse." He hit me, not a slap. A closed fist to the jaw that knocked me sideways into the wagon's wooden ribs. My mother started forward, and he shoved her back so hard she fell. That's when I knew he'd been waiting for an excuse. Knew he'd never wanted me, just tolerated me because my mother came with land rights he needed for his business. "You're not my son," Jacob said. "Never were. Get out of my wagon." "Jacob, please," my mother said from the floor, but she didn't get up, didn't stand between us. That told me everything. "We're in the middle of Montana territory," I said, not arguing, just stating fact. "Then you better start walking." He grabbed my collar, dragged me to the back of the wagon. The canvas flapped in the November wind. Outside, I could see the Bozeman Trail stretching toward mountains that looked like teeth against the sky. "Take your book," he said, shoving my father's manual into my chest. "Since you love it so much." He threw me. Actually picked me up and threw me off the moving wagon like I weighed nothing. I hit the ground hard, rolled in the dust, came up with the manual clutched against my ribs. A blanket landed beside me, tossed as an afterthought. Then the wagon kept moving, didn't even slow down. I stood there in the middle of the trail and watched my mother's face in the back of the wagon getting smaller. She didn't wave, didn't cry, just looked at me until the distance made her disappear. Then I was alone. I tell Michael this part slowly, watching his face. He's listening now, not fidgeting. He knows what it feels like when your own family decides you're not worth keeping. The temperature that afternoon was 15 degrees. I know, because I'd been watching it drop for weeks the way you watch things when you're learning a landscape. 43 miles northeast to Bozeman, the nearest settlement. I had no food, no tools, no weapon. What I had was the clothes on my back, a wool blanket, a knife, small enough to be useless for anything but cutting leather straps, and my father's wheelwright manual. Most people thrown out like that didn't last 3 days. The cold killed you, or the animals, or the simple mathematics of being human in a place designed to kill humans. But standing there in that November dust, I made a decision. I decided that if I was going to die, it wouldn't be because I gave up. It would be because I tried something difficult and failed. There's a difference. The difference matters. I started walking toward the tree line, not toward Bozeman. Toward the lodgepole pines climbing the western slopes toward the creek, I could hear cutting through cottonwoods about 200 yards north. If I was going to survive, I needed water and timber and shelter from wind. The trail offered none of those, so I left it. The creek ran clear and cold, probably spring-fed from higher elevation. I knelt and drank until my stomach ached, then started looking for a place to spend the night. Found a cut bank 30 yards downstream, a place where the creek had carved into the hillside and left an overhang. Not shelter exactly, but a windbreak. It would have to do. I gathered deadfall until I had an armload, then stopped. Stood there holding branches and realized I had no way to make fire. No flint, no steel, no friction bow, no knowledge of how to create fire from nothing. The sun was touching the mountain peaks, and I could feel the temperature dropping, and I understood with absolute clarity that I was about to experience cold like I'd never known. That first night almost killed me. I wedged myself into the cut bank, piled deadfall branches across the opening. To block wind, pulled the blanket over my head. The temperature dropped to 9 degrees by my estimate, cold enough that my fingers went numb, even tucked under my arms. Cold enough that I shook so hard my teeth rattled. I didn't sleep. Instead, I counted. Counted to 1,000, then started over. Counted the number of wagon wheels I'd helped my father build before he died, 42. Counted the wheels I'd repaired on the trail, 17. Counted the number of times Jacob had told me I'd never amount to anything. Stopped counting that one because the number was too high and made me angry, and anger makes you burn energy you can't spare. When dawn came gray and bitter, I crawled out of that cut bank, knowing something crucial. Shelter without heat was just dying slower. I spent that first day mapping resources, found where the creek pooled deep enough to maybe hold fish, marked the pines that had died standing there wood dry and ready to burn if I could ever make fire, located a game trail with fresh elk droppings, discovered an outcrop of sandstone that broke into flat pieces when I pried with a stick. By sunset, I still had no food and no fire, but I had a mental inventory of everything within half a mile that might keep me alive. That was something, not much, but something. The second night was colder, 6 degrees. I added more branches to my windbreak and thought about something I'd heard months ago. An old German stonemason named Klaus Hoffmann, traveling with our wagon train back in May. Everyone thought he was crazy because he wouldn't shut up about something called a Kashelofen, a Russian stove, he called it. A masonry heater that could warm a cabin for 18 hours on a single fire. I hadn't thought Klaus was crazy. My father taught me to listen to old craftsmen before they died because they knew things young men didn't. So while everyone else ignored Klaus, I'd listened. Watched him sketch designs in the dirt during evening camps. Watched him try to explain thermal mass and heat retention to people who just wanted him to be quiet. Klaus had died in July. Typhoid fever, 3 days of burning up from the inside, then gone. But before the wagon train split paths in early June, he'd given me something. A small notebook, 50 pages of drawings and German notes about Kashelofen construction. You have an engineer's mind, he'd said. You'll need it in Montana. Cold there kills fools. Don't be a fool. I'd kept that notebook in my coat pocket ever since. Now shivering in a cut bank with no fire and no food, I pulled it out. Couldn't read the German words, but the drawings were clear. a firebox at ground level, smoke channels winding through massive stone structures, heat transferring into masonry that radiated warmth for hours after flames died. Klaus had said conventional fireplaces lost 80% of their heat straight up the chimney. A proper masonry heater kept 70% in the room. At the time, I thought he was just an old man obsessed with staying warm. Now I understood he'd been trying to save lives. Third morning, I got lucky. Found a dead rabbit in the underbrush, looked like a hawk had killed it, but got scared off before eating. I built a platform of green willow branches over the creek, laid the rabbit on it, let the current wash it clean. Then I ate it raw. My father used to make jerky, taught me to chew slow and thorough, break down the meat until it was almost liquid before swallowing. I did that now with raw rabbit. It tasted like death, but death keeps you from dying. The protein stopped the shaking. Let me think clearly for the first time in 3 days. The wagon trains were done for the season. Nobody else coming through until April. Bozeman was too far without gear. That left one option: survive here through winter or die trying. I needed 4 things in order: fire shelter, food supply, and heat. Real heat, the kind that would keep me alive when temperatures dropped to 20 or 30 below and stayed there for weeks. Fire first. I spent 2 days searching for flint, checked every rock outcrop within a mile, found sandstone granite quartz. No flint. I tried friction methods, the bow drill technique I'd seen demonstrated back in Pennsylvania. Couldn't make it work with frozen fingers and unfamiliar wood. Tried striking rocks together until my hands bled. Nothing. On the 5th day, I found salvation in the form of a broken bottle. Someone had tossed it from a wagon months or years ago, and the curved glass had a magnifying effect. I spent 3 hours nursing a coal from a tinder bundle of shredded cottonwood bark and dry grass blowing so gently my head went light from lack of oxygen. When the flame finally caught, I fed it like it was the only thing in the world that mattered. Because it was. Michael leans forward on the bench. I can see the question forming. "How'd you know to use the glass?" he asks. "My father showed me once," I say. "Said fire was just focused energy. Sun has all the energy you need, you just have to concentrate it." I pause. "That's the thing about knowledge, Michael. You never know which piece you'll need until you need it. That's why you learn everything you can, even if it seems useless at the time." With fire, I could think about shelter. The cut bank was temporarily exposed. I needed walls, a roof, and a specific kind of chimney. I spent a week scouting and found my spot a 1/4 mile upstream. A natural alcove cut into the hillside, maybe 12 feet deep and 15 feet wide. Solid earth on 3 sides, southern exposure that would catch winter sun. Perfect. I could build a front wall across the opening, install a door, and have an earth-sheltered cabin that would stay warmer than any freestanding structure. But more than that, the hillside's thermal mass would work with a masonry heater, not against it. This was November 26th. I figured I had maybe 3 weeks before serious snow. Time to see if a 17-year-old who'd never built a cabin could construct something most grown men wouldn't attempt. I sat down with Klaus's notebook and my father's wheelwright manual and started thinking like an engineer. A wheel works because the hub distributes load evenly to all spokes. Heat distribution is the same principle. You need thermal mass position to radiate in all directions. I sketched plans in the dirt with a stick. The alcove gave me 3 walls for free. I only needed to build across the 15-foot opening. 4 feet thick, I decided. Thick enough to pack with stone and earth for insulation. The roof would be lodgepole logs covered with bark and soil. But the chimney, that was the key. That was what would keep me alive or let me freeze. Klaus's design called for a firebox at floor level in the back corner. Smoke would rise from the firebox, then travel horizontally through stone channels along the back wall. At the corner, it would turn and run along the side wall toward the front. This gave the smoke maybe 15 feet of travel through stone before exiting through a vertical chimney. Every inch of travel meant heat transferred into masonry. I did the math in my head the way my father taught me to calculate load distribution on wagon wheels. If I built the firebox opening at 2 square feet and the chimney exit at 1 square foot, I'd get a 3-to-1 constriction ratio. That would create velocity pull the smoke through. With 15 feet of vertical rise from firebox to chimney cap, the draft should be strong enough to overcome the resistance of serpentine channels. Should be. If I'd calculated right, if Klaus's drawings were accurate. if sandstone could handle thermal stress without cracking too badly. A lot of ifs for a 17-year-old betting his life on dead men's knowledge. On the 18th day, Wilhelm Muller found me. He rode up on a mule one afternoon while I was wrestling a 40-pound stone into the foundation trench I dug across the alcove opening. I'd been using flat rocks as tools, sharpening edges against harder stone, and my hands had blistered, bled, then calloused over in layers. Wilhelm was 58, a German farmer who'd homesteaded 7 miles north along the creek. He sat on his mule watching me work for a full minute before speaking. "You're the Brennan boy," he said, "the one thrown from the wagon." I straightened, wiped my hands on my pants. "Werner, my name is Werner. Brennan isn't my father." Something shifted in Wilhelm's face. Respect, maybe, or recognition. "Fair enough, Werner. What are you building?" "Kachelofen cabin." Wilhelm went very still. "You know what a Kachelofen is?" "Klaus Hoffmann taught me." The name hit Wilhelm like a physical blow. He dismounted, walked over to my foundation, knelt to examine the stonework. His hands shook slightly. "Klaus," he said quietly, "the old stonemason. He came through here 3 years ago with a wagon train I was leading. Wouldn't stop talking about these Russian stoves. Said we'd die without them. I told him no. Said it was too complicated, that we were Americans, not Germans." Wilhelm stood, brushed off his knees. "Winter of 1870 to 71, I lost 2 families. The Johnsons' parents and 3 kids. The Carpenters' old couple. All froze when their firewood ran out in January. They'd burned through 2 months' worth in 3 weeks trying to stay warm with regular fireplaces." He looked at me directly. "Klaus was right. I was a fool. Now Klaus is dead, and here's a 17-year-old boy trying to build what I was too proud to build." He paused. "Where'd you learn this?" I showed him Klaus's notebook, showed him my father's wheelwright manual, explained how I was applying load distribution principles to thermal mass. Wilhelm listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "I have tools. An old axe head with no handle, a broken saw, maybe 12 inches of blade left, some salt pork. I'll bring them tomorrow." "I'll pay you back, come spring," I said. Wilhelm shook his head. "You'll pay me back by surviving. That'll prove Klaus was right and I was wrong. That's payment enough." He mounted his mule, then turned back. "I've been carrying guilt for 3 years, Werner. 2 families, 7 people, dead because I wouldn't listen to a crazy old German. You build this and survive, you prove I could have saved them. That's why I'm helping. Not kindness, redemption." He rode off, and I stood there understanding something about human nature. Most people don't help from pure kindness. They help because helping you helps them. Understanding that doesn't make the help less valuable, just makes it more honest. I tell Michael this part carefully, watching his face. People aren't simple. I say, Wilhelm needed me to succeed so he could forgive himself. That's fine. His reasons don't change the fact that his axe head saved my life. The axe changed everything. I carved a handle from green ash using my knife and wheelwright knowledge about grain direction and tension. Wedged it tight. The first time I swung it at a lodgepole pine, the tree fell in 20 minutes. With a sharp rock, the same tree would have taken 4 hours. Having the right tool doesn't make a job easy, just makes it possible. I worked 12 hours a day, dawn to dusk, stopping only when I couldn't see. Cut lodgepole pines, limbed them, dragged them to the site, built a double frame system for the front wall, outer frame for weather protection, inner frame for roof support, 4 feet of cavity between them to pack with stone and clay mortar and earth. My hands bled through the new calluses. I lost weight. I didn't have to lose, felt my hip bones getting prominent, my ribs showing through my shirt. Food was whatever I could scavenge. A grouse I brained with a thrown rock. Rose hips still clinging to bushes. An elk carcass left by wolves that gave me meat for 5 days before it spoiled. The work kept me warm. The purpose kept me sane. By December 8th, I had the wall frame up and was starting to pack the cavity with fitted stones. But the chimney was the real test, the part that would either save me or kill me. I built the firebox first using the flattest stones I could find, mortaring them tight with creek clay mixed with sand. The opening was 2 feet wide, 18 inches tall, big enough to take substantial wood, small enough to concentrate heat. Then came the channels. First flue rising from the firebox, back then turning horizontal to run along the back wall. At the corner, it turned again, running along the side wall back toward the front. This gave the smoke 15 feet of travel through stone before exiting through a vertical chimney at the front corner. I made a mistake on December 11th, built one channel section 8 inches high instead of 10. Realized it the next day, stood there debating whether to tear it down and lose 2 days or leave it and hope the restriction wouldn't choke the draft. Decided to leave it. If it failed, I'd die. If I tore it down and didn't finish before the snow, I'd die anyway. At least this way I had a chance. Henry Ashford showed up that same day. 42 years old, former Union Army engineer, homesteading 5 miles west. He'd built a proper log cabin with a conventional fireplace, and he arrived with the confidence of a man used to being the smartest person in any room. He examined my construction with a professional eye, walked around the alcove, checked the foundation, studied the chimney channels. Then he started listing problems. First, he said, that chimney's going to collapse under its own weight. You've got no proper foundation under it, and clay mortar won't hold when it heats and cools. I kept working, fitting stones. Foundation's 3 feet down to bedrock. You're standing on it. Henry checked, looked surprised. That's adequate, he admitted. But your firebox is built wrong. Those stones will crack from thermal shock. You need fire brick, not sandstone. Stones will crack by April, I said. I'll replace them next summer. This winter they'll hold. And your draft calculation. You can't just guess at these things. That fire will either smoke you out or suffocate itself. I stopped working, stood up, sketched in the dirt with a stick, showed him the math. Firebox opening 2 square feet, chimney exit 1 square foot, 3-to-1 ratio, 15 feet of vertical rise. Explained how it was the same principle as calculating spoke tension on a wagon wheel, just applied to thermodynamics instead of mechanics. Henry stared at the calculations. Where'd you learn this? From my father. He taught me wheels. Wheels and chimneys are both about distributing force. Heat's just another kind of force. I could see the conflict on his face. Professional respect fighting against ego. Here was a 17-year-old thrown from a wagon building, something Henry couldn't build, and building it well. If I succeeded, it made his 3 years of work look inadequate. Even if it works, he said finally, you're talking about heating this space on 1 fire a day. You'll freeze waiting for the stone to warm up. Klaus heated 800 square feet in Milwaukee on 2 fires a day. I said, this cabin's 90 square feet, 1 fire, 3-hour burn, 18 to 20-hour heat release. That's mathematics, not hope. Henry wanted to argue more. I could see it, but something in my voice stopped him. Maybe he heard the same thing I heard, certainty built on calculation, not blind faith. You've got a week before heavy weather hits, he said, mounting his horse. Better have that roof on. After he left, I stood there realizing what he'd actually said. Not you'll fail, not this won't work. Just better have that roof on. He believed I might succeed, and that terrified him because if I was right, then his whole approach was wrong. I tell Michael about Henry carefully. People resist your ideas not because the ideas are wrong, say. They resist because if you're right, they're wrong, and nobody wants to be wrong, especially men who've built their whole identity on being right. The roof went up on December 14th. Lodgepole logs across the wall frames, then bark, then 8 inches of earth. The weight was enormous, maybe 1,700 pounds, but the earth walls and thick front wall distributed it fine. I left a gap at the front corner for the chimney exit building, the stonework around it. December 15th, the moment of truth. I built a fire in the firebox using dry lodgepole, fed it full, lit it with an ember from the maintenance fire I'd been keeping outside. The smoke rose from the firebox, hit the first channel, and backed up into the cabin. Filled the space with choking gray smoke that stung my eyes and made me stumble outside, gasping. I'd built wrong, all that work, and I'd created a smoke chamber instead of a heater. I sat in the snow thinking through the problem like my father taught me. Diagnosis first. The draft existed, I could feel slight pull, but not strong enough to overcome serpentine resistance. Solution: increase height or decrease resistance. Couldn't decrease resistance, channels were already built. Had to increase height. I climbed onto the roof in falling snow, temperature 12 degrees, and added 18 inches to the chimney using my last good stones and mortar. My fingers went numb. I nearly fell twice, but I got it done. Second attempt, I rebuilt the fire. This time the smoke pulled clean with a sound like wind in a hollow tree, exactly like Klaus had described. I fed that fire for 3 hours, watching the firebox stones begin to radiate heat you could feel from 6 feet away. The channel stones warmed section by section as smoke transferred thermal energy into mass. By noon, the entire chimney structure was warm to the touch. By sunset, it was radiating enough heat to bring the cabin temperature to 48 degrees, while outside it dropped towards zero. I banked the coals, closed the firebox with a flat stone to trap heat, and settled onto my sleeping platform of lashed poles covered with pine boughs. Through the night, that chimney mass radiated steady warmth. I woke at midnight, reached out in darkness, touched the stones. Still 90 degrees. Woke again near dawn. Cooler now, maybe 70, but the cabin temperature had held around 38 degrees all night with no new fuel. Outside, Wilhelm told me later it had dropped to 6 below zero. I'd survived the night warmer than I'd been in a month, using a fraction of the wood a conventional fireplace would require. The Kachelofen worked. Klaus had been right about everything. That morning, 17 years old, sitting in a cabin I'd built beside a fire that had died 10 hours before still warm, I cried, not from fear, from pride. I look at Michael now, here in this same cabin, 50 years later. The stones around us are the same stones I fitted with frozen hands at 17. They're still here, still holding. The cabin saved my life that winter, I tell him. But December was just the beginning. January brought the real test, the blizzard that should have killed me. And then February brought something worse than cold, brought hunger so bad I wrote my own death message. I walk to the chimney, pull out the old piece of bark I've kept for 50 years. The charcoal writing is faded but readable. I hand it to Michael. Read it, I say. He reads aloud. Thomas Werner, age 17, built Kachelofen cabin December 1873. Chimney work 74% efficiency. Tell Margaret Thorne the design. She'll teach others. I wrote that, I tell him, on February 14th, 1874, when I thought I was dying. Not from cold, from starvation. Even when I thought I had hours left, I was thinking about teaching, about passing knowledge forward. Because that's what Klaus did for me. That's what my father did. That's what matters. Michael looks at the bark, then at me. What happened? How'd you survive? That, I say, is a longer story. But the point is this: the cabin kept me warm, but warmth doesn't keep you alive if you have nothing to eat. And teaching doesn't matter if you die before you can pass it on. I take the bark back, tuck it carefully into my pocket. You want to know how the story ends? Then you need to hear part 2. The blizzard, the hunger, and the moment I realized surviving alone doesn't matter. What matters is what you build that outlasts you. Michael nods slowly. He's not fidgeting anymore, not looking away. He's leaning forward, invested the way people lean forward when a story hooks them somewhere vital. Tomorrow, I tell him, come back tomorrow. I'll tell you about the 3 days that nearly killed me and the lesson that saved 43 families. I pause. But tonight you go home and think about something. Jacob threw me away because I taught his daughters to read. Your father wants to throw you away because you fought back against a bully. We're both being discarded for refusing to be less than we are. I place my hand on his shoulder. Question is, what are you going to build to prove them wrong? I watch him walk away through the snow, his footprints dark against white. Tomorrow I'll tell him about the blizzard, about Henry bringing food when I was dying, about Margaret and the teaching that spread through the valley like fire through dry timber. But tonight I've given him enough, given him the first piece, the thrown boy, the impossible build, the moment when knowledge from a dead German and a dead father combined to create something that would stand for 79 winters and counting. I close the cabin door and sit beside the chimney. The stones are warm under my palm, always warm. For 50 years, I've kept a small fire burning in this firebox, just enough to maintain heat in the mass. Not because I need it, because it reminds me. Reminds me that knowledge properly applied becomes structure. Structure becomes shelter. Shelter becomes legacy. And legacy is the only thing that matters when you're 67 and looking back at 50 years. Klaus Hoffmann. Wherever you are, thank you. You saved my life, and through me, you saved dozens more. Your knowledge didn't die with you. It multiplied. That's what I need Michael to understand. That's why I'm telling him this story. Not because I want him to build a catchalofen, because I want him to understand that being thrown away doesn't define you. What you build after being thrown away defines you. Tomorrow, part 2, the blizzard, the test that proved everything. But tonight the stones are warm and the cabin stands, and that's enough. Michael comes back the next morning like I knew he would. Snow fell overnight another 3 inches on top of what was already there, and he's trudging through it with his coat buttoned wrong and his boots unlaced. 16 years old and still doesn't know how to dress for Montana winter. His father never taught him. Too busy working, too busy drinking, too busy being disappointed in a son who reminds him of all his own failures. I've got coffee waiting. Real coffee, not the chicory substitute most people drink. I can afford real coffee now, 50 years after I couldn't afford to eat. Funny how time works. Sit, I tell him, handing him a cup. He sits on the same bench as yesterday near the catchalofen. The stones are radiating heat from the morning fire I built 3 hours ago. The fire's been out for an hour, but you'd never know it from the warmth. Michael notices. I see him touch the stone with his free hand, feel the heat, look confused. Fire's out, I say. Has been for an hour, but the stone remembers. That's what thermal mass means. It remembers heat the way you remember lessons, holds on to it, releases it slow. He nods, sipping coffee, waiting for me to continue the story. Good. He's learning patience. Yesterday he would have interrupted by now, asked questions just to hear himself talk. Today he's listening. December 16th, 1873, I begin. The cabin was finished. The catchalofen worked. I'd survived the impossible build, but Montana winter doesn't care about your accomplishments. It just keeps coming. The first visitors started arriving within days. Word travels fast in empty country. A 17-year-old thrown from a wagon had built an earth-sheltered cabin with some kind of experimental chimney, and he wasn't dead yet. That was news. Margaret Thorne came on December 19th. She was 34, a widow running her late husband's claim with 2 children. Daniel 12, Sarah 8. Her husband had died the previous spring, kicked by a horse dead before he hit to the ground. Left her with a cabin that never stayed warm, no matter how much wood she burned, and winter coming with 2 kids depending on her. She rode up on a tired mare and didn't waste time with pleasantries. Show me how it works, she said. I walked her through the design, showed her the serpentine channels, explained how smoke traveling through stone transferred heat into mass, demonstrated the closed damper system that trapped warmth after the fire died. She listened the way engineers listen, asking questions that showed she understood principles, not just procedures. When I finished, she touched the chimney stones. They'd been radiating for 14 hours since the morning fire, still warm enough to feel through her glove. I'll be damned, she said. Klaus wasn't crazy. We were just too stubborn to listen. She looked at me directly. I'm rebuilding my place come spring. You'll help me? I'll help anyone who wants to learn, I said. Klaus gave me this knowledge for free. Only right I pass it on the same way. Margaret reached into her saddlebag and pulled out a cloth sack. Inside were 4 potatoes, a chunk of salt pork, and half a loaf of bread. Payment in advance, she said. When I started to refuse, she held up her hand. Not for teaching, for surviving. You're proof the design works. That's worth something. After she left, I sat in my cabin holding that bread and understood something important. I wasn't just a boy who'd survived anymore. I was a teacher. Someone who held knowledge other people needed. That changed everything. Changed how I saw myself. Changed what I thought I was worth. Wilhelm stopped by on December 23rd with more supplies. Cornmeal, beans, dried apples. "Merry Christmas," he said gruffly, then left before I could thank him properly. Guilt makes people generous, but it also makes them uncomfortable with gratitude. They want to help, but they don't want to talk about why. Then on December 27th, Robert Crane showed up. He was 47, a railroad surveyor who'd decided to homestead near the eventual rail line. Smart thinking. When the railroad came through, his land would be worth 10 times what he paid. He'd built plenty of structures in his 47 years, and he came with the confidence of experience. He examined my cabin with a professional eye, checked the stonework, the roof load distribution, the chimney design. It's clever, he admitted, better than I would have expected from someone your age. But you're missing something crucial. I waited. When we get a real blizzard, Robert said, and we will, the wind's going to come screaming down this valley and backdraft your chimney. That smoke will get pushed down instead of up, and you'll suffocate in here. The words hit me like cold water. He was right. I'd calculated draft for normal conditions, not for 40-mile-per-hour winds hitting the chimney opening directly. What's the solution? I asked. Wine cap, Robert said. Need something that blocks horizontal wind but lets vertical smoke out. Back in Illinois, we use metal caps. You don't have metal, but you could do it with stone. Build a square collar around the chimney top with openings on all four sides, then cap it with a flat stone. Wind hits the collar instead of going straight down the pipe. We built it together over the next 2 days, Robert directing me, doing most of the physical work. The cap added another 30 inches to the chimney height and probably saved my life. Because on January 2nd, 1874, the blizzard hit. Michael leans forward. This is what he's been waiting for. The crisis. The moment that tests everything. Young men love that part of stories. It takes age to appreciate the quiet parts. The building parts, the parts where nothing dramatic happens, but foundations get laid. I was ready for winter. Thought I was anyway. Had 2 weeks of firewood stacked inside the cabin. Had dried elk meat, cornmeal, beans. Had a structure that kept me warm on minimal fuel. What I didn't have was any real understanding of what Montana winter could do when it decided to kill you. The sky that morning was purple-gray, the kind of color that makes animals nervous. Wilhelm rode by around 10 in the morning. Big storm coming, he said. Maybe 3 days. You have enough wood? I showed him my supply. He nodded. Stay inside when it hits. Don't try to go out for anything. People die in whiteouts 10 feet from their own doors because they can't see to get back. By noon, the temperature had dropped from 22 degrees to 10. By 2 in the afternoon, it was 0. By 4, it was -5 and the wind was picking up. By 6, it was -15 and the first snow was falling. I fired the chimney for 4 hours that afternoon, burning it hotter than I ever had. Loaded the thermal mass to maximum capacity. By the time I sealed the door with packed snow and rags, the cabin temperature was 55 degrees and the stones were too hot to touch barehanded. The blizzard arrived like a freight train that never passes. Wind hit the cabin at maybe 40 miles per hour, shaking the walls, testing every joint in the log frame. Snow came horizontal, 3 feet in 4 hours and still coming. The sound was constant, a roar that made thinking difficult and sleeping impossible. I couldn't see 2 feet outside the hide-covered windows. The world beyond my walls had disappeared into white chaos. Temperature kept dropping. -15 became -22. -22 became -26. By midnight, it was -31 degrees outside, and the wind hadn't stopped. Inside the cabin held at 42 degrees. The chimney mass was doing exactly what Klaus said it would, absorbing heat for hours, releasing it slow and steady. I could lean against those stones and feel warmth soaking through my clothes into my skin. 73 degrees of difference between inside and outside, maintained by nothing but stones holding heat from a fire that had died 6 hours ago. But the noise, the constant howling that sounded like something alive and angry trying to get in. That was the hard part, not the cold, the isolation. The sense that the entire world had shrunk to 90 square feet of warm space surrounded by infinite killing cold. I couldn't open the door. The snow had packed against it, frozen solid. I was sealed in with water from melting snow food for maybe 5 days if I rationed hard and heat from the mass heater. Every 20 hours, I'd fire the chimney again, one careful burn, watching the cabin temperature fluctuate between 38 and 52 degrees. On the second day around noon, I heard a loud crack from above. The roof. Something had hit it, or it was failing under snow weight. I stood there staring up at the earth-covered logs, trying to calculate load. 1,700 pounds of roof, now maybe another 1,000 pounds of snow on top. Was it too much? Would the frame hold? If it collapsed, I'd be buried alive in my own shelter. The crack didn't repeat. Whatever had happened, the structure held. But I spent the rest of that day doing push-ups and sit-ups, partly to stay warm, partly to keep from thinking about being crushed. Day 3, the wind finally stopped. The silence was shocking after 72 hours of constant roar. Temperature was still -28, but the air was still. Dead calm. I started digging at the door with a flat piece of wood pushing snow, compressing it, making a tunnel. Took 2 hours to break through to outside. Brilliant sunshine. Air so cold it burned my lungs. The valley was transformed, snowdrifts 10 feet high in places. The creek frozen solid under 3 inches of ice. Pine trees bent under snow, weight some snapped completely. And my cabin earth sheltered and solid standing exactly as I'd built it. Wilhelm showed up the next day. His face was grim. "You made it," he said. There was respect in his voice, but also sorrow. The Johnsons didn't. The name meant nothing to me. Hushaue, family homesteading, 4 miles south. Parents, 2 kids, 5 and 7 years old. Wilhelm looked older than he had a week ago. Found them yesterday. Frozen. All 4 of them. The words didn't process at first. Then they did, and I felt sick. They had a conventional fireplace, Wilhelm continued. Burned through 2 weeks of wood in 2 days trying to stay warm. Ran out on day 3. Temperature in their cabin dropped to -10. Hypothermia took them overnight. We found them huddled together, kids wrapped in their parents' arms. He showed me the numbers later. The Johnsons had burned roughly 75 logs in 2 days. I'd burned 18 logs in 3 days. 4-to-1 efficiency advantage. They'd died. I'd lived. Same storm. Same cold. Different knowledge. I tell Michael this part slowly, watching his reaction. He's young enough to think death is something that happens to other people, old enough to understand it's real. That's when I learned something crucial. I say, surviving wasn't enough. Wasn't. I had a responsibility to teach. Klaus tried to teach and people didn't listen. The Johnsons died because they didn't know to ask. Knowledge died with Klaus because we were too proud to learn. I decided right then I'd teach anyone who asked. For free. Klaus's knowledge didn't belong to me. It belonged to everyone who needed it. But December's blizzard tested the cabin. January and February tested me. Food started running low in mid-January. I was down to 1 meal a day by the 18th. Cornmeal mush and whatever I could trap. I'd set snares along the creek and caught 3 rabbits over 2 weeks. Not enough. Not nearly enough. My weight dropped. Started at maybe 160 down to 152 after construction, down to 145 by late January. Then came the warm spell. February 8th, temperature rose from -5 to 25 degrees. The surface snow melted. I thought I could forage, find frozen berries, old nuts, something. Instead, that night a cold snap hit. Dropped to -18 overnight. Everything froze into a sheet of ice. The game disappeared, locked under that ice layer. My snares caught nothing. By February 12th, I was out of food completely. No cornmeal, no dried meat, nothing. I tried boiling pine bark. Bitter and useless. Tried chewing leather scraps from my boots, got nothing. My weight dropped to maybe 135. 25 pounds lost in 3 months. I could see my ribs clearly. My hip bones were prominent. My hands shook when I tried to work. February 13th, I was too weak to gather wood. Couldn't fire the chimney. The temperature outside dropped to -12. Inside, with no fire for 36 hours, it dropped to 26 degrees overnight. I wrapped myself in the blanket and lay against cooling chimney stones, understanding with absolute clarity that I'd survived winter's worst cold only to die during the thaw. The irony was sharp. I'd built a perfect heating system, but you can't heat yourself without fuel. Can't get fuel without food. Can't get food without energy. The loop had closed. I was trapped inside my own success, warm enough not to freeze, but too weak to save myself. February 14th, I accepted it. Took a piece of bark and wrote with charcoal, Thomas Werner, age 17, built Kakelofen cabin, December 1873. Chimney works 74% efficiency measured. Tell Margaret Thorne the design. She'll teach others. I propped it against the chimney, lay down, closed my eyes. Even dying, I was thinking about teaching, about passing knowledge forward, because that's what mattered. Not that I'd survived, that others would survive after me. That afternoon, Henry Ashford kicked in my door. I barely registered it, was somewhere between sleep and unconsciousness. Heard the door crash open, felt cold air rush in, heard footsteps. Henry's voice saying something I couldn't process. Then he was lifting me, propping me against the wall, forcing something into my mouth. Water, then broth, then small pieces of meat. When I could focus, I saw he'd brought supplies. An elk haunch, maybe 40 pounds of meat, a sack of beans, cornmeal, enough to last weeks. You were right about the chimney, Henry said. His voice was gruff, uncomfortable. I'm adapting the design for my place. Figured you earned payment for the engineering lesson. He paused. Also can't let you die. Would make me look bad since I said you'd fail. He left before I could respond. Just dropped the supplies and walked out into the February cold. But I understood what he'd done. He'd set aside his ego long enough to save my life. That's harder than it sounds. Ego kills more people than cold ever does. I cooked meat that night, eating slowly because my stomach had shrunk. 4 small meals instead of 1 large one. The protein brought strength back gradually. Within a week, I could split wood again. Within 2 weeks, I was setting snares and catching rabbits as they emerged from winter burrows. By early March, I'd regained 10 pounds and could think clearly again. Spring announced itself on March 4th with temperatures above freezing. The French drain I'd built worked perfectly, channeling meltwater around the cabin instead of through it. Green shoots appeared in sheltered spots. Wild onions, early greens. I foraged constantly, rebuilding my body on fresh food. Margaret came back on March 15th, brought her son Daniel with her. The boy was bright, curious, asked good questions. How do the channels work? He wanted to know. Why does stone stay warm? Could you build it bigger? I walked him through the principles. Thermal mass, heat transfer, surface area for radiation. He absorbed it like a sponge absorbs water, the way children do when you teach them something useful instead of something arbitrary. Margaret made her decision right there. I'm rebuilding my cabin in May. You'll help me design it. We'll build it together through summer. I'll pay you. I'll help, I said, but I won't charge. Knowledge should be free. Then I'll pay you in food while we work, and lodging, and the satisfaction of knowing you saved 2 kids from freezing like the Johnsons. She pulled out another sack of supplies. Potatoes, salt, pork, bread. This is different from December. December was charity. This is payment in advance for labor you'll provide. Accept it or I'll find someone else to teach me. Smart woman knew I couldn't refuse help if it was framed as fair exchange. I accepted. By May of 1874, I had a business model I hadn't planned. Margaret's cabin rebuild started in earnest. I designed her cachaloaf and calculated thermal mass for her larger space, helped her lay out serpentine channels. We worked through June and July. By August, she had a functioning masonry heater that cut her wood needs by 60% and kept her children warm. Wilhelm added a smaller cachalofen to his existing cabin in August. Reported it transformed his life, let him sleep through nights without waking to feed a fire. By fall 7, masonry heaters were operating in the valley. Winter of 1874 to 75 came and went with 0 cold-related deaths. I was 18 years old and had accidentally become the valley's expert on efficient heating. People came from other settlements to see my cabin. I started charging for designs, $10 to draw up plans, $25 more if they wanted help building. The money bought proper tools. A real saw, hammer, chisels, level. I bought a milk cow, 6 chickens, a small forge and anvil, taught myself blacksmithing the same way I'd taught myself masonry, by reading, experimenting, failing, trying again. Made my own door hinges, hardware for Margaret's cabin, repairs for Wilhelm's wagon. Each skill built on the last. Each problem solved taught me how to solve the next one. I expanded my cabin in the spring of 1875, added a second room, built a root cellar that kept food fresh year-round. The original cachalofen remained the heating heart, but now it warmed twice the space. Then in summer of 1876, James Peterson arrived. He was 28, a territorial surveyor, working for the Montana government. His job was to document frontier architecture, figure out what worked and what killed people. He'd heard about my cabin through official channels, mentions in homesteading reports, references in Wilhelm's letters to the territorial office. James spent 3 days measuring everything: heat retention, fuel consumption, temperature differentials. He interviewed me about the design process, talked to Margaret about user experience, Asked Wilhelm about community impact. Took photographs of the cabin exterior, the chimney interior, even Klaus's notebook. His official report, which I saw years later in the Montana Historical Society archives, called my cabin a remarkable synthesis of European thermal mass principles, American frontier necessity, and practical engineering. He calculated my heat retention at 74% versus conventional fireplaces at 18%. Noted my winter fuel consumption was one-fifth the valley average while maintaining superior interior temperatures. The report recommended disseminating the design through territorial building guidelines. Within a year, every new homesteader in Montana Territory received a printed pamphlet. Efficient Frontier Heating the Kakelofen design, credited to T. Werner and K. Hoffman. But James brought more than professional validation. He brought a proposal. "I'm establishing a surveying office in Bozeman," he said on his last day. "Needs someone who understands structures, mathematics, engineering. Someone who can look at land and see what it can become." He paused. Interested. I thought about it. "Can I keep the cabin?" "This is your home," James said. "Office would be in Bozeman, but we'd live here, if you want." The "we" hung in the air between us. "You're asking me to partner with you," I said. "Business and life." "I'm asking you to partner with me because you're the best structural thinker I've met, and because I respect what you've built and who you've become." James met my eyes. "Not rescue, partnership. Equals." I accepted. I tell Michael this carefully. Watch his face as he processes it. Young people today understand these things differently than my generation did. Better, I think, more honest. James and I ran that firm for 43 years, I say. Designed cabins, barns, public buildings all over Montana. Specialized in efficient heating. Made good money. But more than that, we were happy. Built a life together. Adopted 2 boys who'd lost their parents to frontier hardships. Raised them here in this cabin, teaching them everything Klaus taught me. Michael nods slowly. "What happened to him, James?" "Pneumonia, 1921. He was 73. Died in that room there." I point to the door. "In his sleep, peaceful. We'd had 44 years together. That's more than most people get." I walk to the window. Outside, snow is falling again. Always falling in Montana winter. By 1880, 43 families in this valley were using Kakelofen designs. The winter death rate dropped from 12% to 2% over 6 years. Klaus Hoffman's crazy ideas filtered through a 17-year-old boy's desperation changed the mathematics of survival in Montana Territory. I turn back to Michael. That's the second part of the story. The blizzard that tested the cabin. The starvation that tested me. The teaching that multiplied knowledge. And the partnership that gave me a life worth living. Michael is quiet for a long moment. Then, what's part 3? Part 3, I say, is about legacy, about what happens when you live long enough to see the results of your work, about the cabin standing for 79 years and counting, about knowledge multiplying through generations. I pause. And about what I'm going to give you before you leave here, before you decide whether to go to that factory or build something that matters. I can see the question forming on his face, but I hold up my hand. "Tomorrow," I say, "come back tomorrow, one more day, then you'll have the whole story. Then you'll understand why I brought you here." He nods, stands, pulls on his coat. At the door, he stops. "Grandfather, did you ever see your mother again? After Jacob threw you out?" The question catches me off guard. I haven't thought about that in years. "Once," I say, 1879. She came to Bozeman, heard I was there. Found me at the surveying office. She was 50 by then, looked 70. Jacob had died in a wagon accident 4 years earlier. She wanted to know if I'd forgive her. "Did you, Dom?" I told her there was nothing to forgive. She'd made her choice, I'd made mine. Her choice led to a hard life with a man who died leaving her nothing. My choice led to this. I gesture around the cabin. She cried, said she was proud of me. I told her pride from someone who didn't fight for you doesn't mean much. I pause. She died 6 months later. Consumption. I paid for the funeral, not because I forgave her, because it was the right thing to do. Michael absorbs this. That's cold, grandfather. That's honest, I correct. There's a difference. Love without action is just words. She loved me maybe, But she didn't fight for me. That taught me something important about what love actually means. He leaves and I watch him trudge through the snow again. Tomorrow I'll tell him the final part. The legacy, the 79 years, the knowledge multiplying through time. And then I'll give him Klaus's notebook and my father's manual and send him out to build whatever he's going to build. But tonight I sit by the chimney again. The stones are cooling now, down to maybe 80 degrees, but still warm enough to feel. I built this chimney at 17 with frozen hands and dead men's knowledge. It's kept me warm for 50 winters. Will keep someone warm for winters after I'm gone. That's what matters. Not that I survived, not that I succeeded, that what I built outlasts me. That knowledge doesn't die when the teacher dies. That Klaus's voice still echoes through these valleys in every cabin that stays warm on minimal wood. Tomorrow Michael will understand. Tomorrow he'll see the whole picture. But tonight the stones remember heat. And I remember being 17 and desperate and determined not to die for no reason. The stones held then. They hold now. They'll hold tomorrow. That's legacy. That's what I need Michael to grasp. One more day. One more part of the story. Then he'll choose. Factory or builder. Victim or craftsman. Forgotten or remembered. The choice is his. But I can give him the tools to choose wisely. The way Klaus gave them to me. The way my father gave them before that. Knowledge passing forward through time. Warmer than any fire. Lasting longer than any stone. That's the real heat. That's what keeps you alive long after winter ends. Michael doesn't come in the morning this time. He comes in the afternoon, and when he arrives, I can see he's been thinking. His coat is buttoned right. His boots are laced. Small things, but they matter. Details matter. That's something his father never taught him, but something he's learning now. I've been waiting by the window watching snow fall across the valley. Same valley where I nearly died 53 years ago. Same hills. Same creek, though. It has changed course slightly over the decades, the way water does. Same lodgepole pines on the western slopes, different trees, but same species growing where their ancestors grew. Sit, I tell Michael when he comes in. He sits without being told twice. Learning. I talked to my father last night, he says. Told him about your story. About the cabin, the blizzard, all of it. What did he say? Said it was just a story. Said times are different now. Said I need to be practical, take the factory job, stop dreaming about building things. Michael looks at me. Said you got lucky and luck isn't a plan. I nod slowly. Expected this. Your father is scared, I say. Scared that if you succeed at something he never tried, it makes his choices look small. That's not about you, that's about him. I pour coffee, hand him a cup. But he's also wrong. What happened to me wasn't luck. It was knowledge applied to necessity. Big difference. I settle into my chair, the one I've been sitting in for 40 years, the one James built for me in 1883 when my back started giving me trouble. The wood is smooth from decades of use. Everything in this cabin is smooth from use. Worn, but functional. Like me. Part 3, I say, the legacy. This is the part your father won't understand because he's never built anything meant to outlast him. January 2nd, 1874. The blizzard that should have killed me. I've already told Michael about surviving it, about the Johnsons dying in the same storm. What I haven't told him is what happened after. The weight of that knowledge, the responsibility it created. I started teaching in earnest that spring. Not just Margaret, anyone who asked. I'd ride to homesteads, look at their cabins, calculate thermal mass requirements, sketch cachalofen designs in the dirt. Some people paid me. Some couldn't afford to pay. I taught them anyway because Klaus had taught me for free, and some debts you pay forward, not back. By summer of 1874, I had a pattern. Spring and summer for building, helping families construct masonry heaters before winter came. Fall for my own work, expanding my cabin, improving my forge skills. Winter for planning drawing designs, refining calculations. The railroad came through in September like Wilhelm predicted. They needed a cook for the construction crew, 30 men laying track 12 hours a day. Robert Crane vouched for me. $25 a month, huge money for an 18-year-old. I took the pound and saved every dollar and spent evenings teaching the crew about cachalofens. 2 of those railroad men built their own masonry heaters at their claims. They taught others. Knowledge spreading like ripples in water, moving farther from the source but carrying the same information. By 1875, 7 cachalofins in the valley. By 1876, 15. By 1880, 43 families using the design. And the winter death rate, which had been 12% when I arrived in 1873, dropped to 2% by 1880. 6 years, 43 families, hundreds of lives saved because one old German stonemason wouldn't shut up about thermal mass, and one throne boy listened. I tell Michael these numbers slowly, making sure he understands. That's legacy, I say. Not building one thing, building something that teaches people to build more things. Multiplication, not addition. But the real validation came in summer of 1876 with James Peterson's official report, when the territorial government started distributing pamphlets about cachalofin design to every new homesteader. That's when I knew Klaus's knowledge had become permanent, institutionalized. It would outlive me now, encoded in official documents taught in homesteading courses, built into the fabric of how Montana Territory thought about winter survival. James and I started our surveying and architecture firm in 1877. I was 21. He was 29. We were good at it, both of us. James understood land, could read topography like other people read books. I understood structures, could look at a site and see what would work, what would fail, what would last. We designed over 200 buildings in the next 40 years. Cabins, barns, schools, churches, town halls. Every single one incorporated efficient heating principles. Not always full cachalofins, sometimes just better fireplace design, better insulation, better thermal mass positioning, but always better than what people had been building. Our reputation grew. People came from 3 counties away to hire us. We made good money, but more than that, we made things that lasted. That mattered more. We adopted our first boy in 1882, Samuel. He was 9 years old, orphaned when his parents died of diphtheria. Smart kid, good with numbers, terrible with people. Reminded me of myself at that age. We taught him surveying, architecture, engineering. He grew up in this cabin, sleeping in the room James and I added in 1880, learning to fire the cachalofin, understanding from daily experience how thermal mass worked. Second boy came in 1885. Robert, named after Robert Crane, who'd helped me build the wind cap. Robert was 7 when we got him wild and angry parents killed by a late spring blizzard. Took him 2 years to trust us. But once he did, he absorbed knowledge, like desert, sand absorbs rain. Wanted to know how everything worked, why things failed, what made structures strong. We raised them here, taught them everything. Klaus taught me everything my father taught me, everything James and I learned together. They both became engineers. Samuel specialized in bridges, Robert specialized in water systems. They built things all over Montana that are still standing today, still functioning, still serving the people who use them. That's legacy compounding. Klaus taught me. I taught Margaret and Wilhelm and dozens of others. I taught Samuel and Robert. They taught hundreds more, and those hundreds taught thousands. Knowledge multiplying across generations like interest in a bank account. I stop here, let Michael process. He's following along, I can see it in his eyes. But he doesn't yet understand what I'm building toward. The cabin stood, I continue. Year after year, winter after winter. The original cachalofin needed maintenance, of course. I replaced the firebox stones in 1874 like I knew I'd have to. Replaced them again in 1898 when thermal cycling finally cracked them beyond repair. But the serpentine channels, the ones I built with frozen hands in December 1873, never needed replacing. The clay mortar held. The structure held. James died in 1921. Pneumonia. It came fast, 3 days from first cough to last breath. He was 73. We'd had 44 years together. He died in the bed we'd shared for 4 decades in the room we'd built onto this cabin in 1880. Died with me holding his hand, with Samuel and Robert standing at the foot of the bed with winter sunlight coming through the window. His last words were, "The stones will hold." Not talking about the cabin, talking about everything we'd built together. The firm, the beasts, the knowledge we'd passed forward, all of it resting on foundation we'd laid stone by stone year by year. I buried him on the hillside above the cabin, same hillside I'd cut into 50 years earlier to build my shelter. The grave faces south, gets winter sun, stays a little warmer than the rest of the cemetery. James would have appreciated that. Always was particular about thermal efficiency. After he died, I retired, sold the firm to Samuel and Robert. They were 50 and 46 by then, both master engineers, both better at the technical work than I'd ever been. I kept the cabin, moved back here full-time, lived alone for the first time since 1877. That's when I started really understanding legacy. When you're young, legacy is theoretical, something that might happen later. When you're old, legacy is concrete. It's the things still standing after you thought you'd be gone. It's the people still using knowledge you taught them. It's the realization that you've become the old German stonemason, the one trying to pass forward what he knows before he dies, and it dies with him. I'm 67 now. Klaus was 68 when I met him. Same age, different century, but the same urgency, the same need to make sure knowledge doesn't die when the body does. I walk to the corner where I keep Klaus's notebook and my father's wheelwright manual. Both are wrapped in oilcloth protected from moisture and time. I've kept them safe for 53 years. Now it's time to pass them forward again. Michael, I say turning back to him, your father wants to send you to factory work because you got in a fight defending yourself. Wants to punish you for refusing to be a victim. Same thing my stepfather did to me. Threw me away for teaching his daughters to read for refusing to keep people ignorant. I place the notebook and manual on the table between us. This is Klaus Hoffmann's notebook, 53 years old, the drawings that saved my life and the lives of 43 families. And this is my father's wheelwright manual, 70 years old, the knowledge that taught me to think like an engineer. Michael reaches out, touches them carefully. Why are you showing me these? Because I'm giving them to you. He pulls his hand back like the books burned him. I can't take these. They're yours. They were never mine, I correct. Klaus gave them to me because I needed them and because he knew I'd use them. My father left his manual to me because he wanted his knowledge to continue. Now I'm giving them to you, not because you need to build catchalofens, because you need to understand what knowledge means, what it can do, how it multiplies when you share it instead of hoarding it. I sit back down feeling the weight of 67 years in my bones. You have a choice to make, Michael. Factory work is honest labor. Nothing wrong with it. But it's labor where you trade hours for money, then the hours are gone, and the money gets spent, and nothing remains. Or you can learn to build things, real things, things that last longer than you do, things that teach other people to build more things. I pull out the piece of bark, the one I wrote on February 14th, 1874. 52 years old now, the charcoal fading but still readable. I hand it to Michael. Read it again, I say. He reads aloud, Thomas Werner, age 17, built Catchalofen cabin, December 1873. Chimney works 74% efficiency. Tell Margaret Thorne the design. She'll teach others. I wrote that when I thought I had hours left to live, I say. Starving, too weak to stand. And what was I thinking about? Not survival, teaching, making sure the knowledge didn't die with me. That's what mattered then. That's what matters now. I lean forward. The cabin is 79 years old, Michael. 79 winters. The stones I placed with frozen hands when I was 17 are still here. Still holding. Still warm. In 79 more years, I'll be gone. You'll be gone. But these stones might still be here. That's what legacy means. Building things that outlast you. Michael is quiet for a long time. Outside, the snow has stopped. Late afternoon sun breaks through clouds, hits the hillside, makes the snow sparkle like broken glass. Beautiful and cold at the same time. Montana in a single image. What happened to your stepfather? Michael asks finally. Jacob, did you ever see him again? I shake my head. Died in 1875. Wagon accident in Wyoming. Axle broke, wagon rolled, crushed him. He never knew I survived. Never knew I became a master builder. Never knew the useless boy he threw away saved 43 families from his same fate. I pause. Best revenge isn't proving them wrong. It's building something so good they become irrelevant. Michael nods slowly. My father said times are different now. Times are always different, I say. Technology changes, culture changes, but principles don't change. Thermal mass worked in ancient Rome, worked in 1873, works now. Knowledge applied to necessity creates solutions. That doesn't change. Your father is scared because he never learned to build anything permanent. Don't let his fear become your ceiling. I stand again, walk to the cachaloaf and place my hand on the stones. They're warm, maybe 85 degrees, radiating heat from the fire I built 6 hours ago. The fire is long dead, but the heat remains. Always remains. This chimney, I say, represents everything I'm trying to teach you. It's not just stones, it's knowledge from a dead German stonemason, filtered through a desperate boy's hands, tested by winter, that should have killed him, proven by 5 decades of functioning exactly as designed. It's Klaus Hoffmann's voice still speaking. It's my father's principles still working. It's James Peterson's validation still standing in archives. It's 43 families who didn't freeze. It's Samuel and Robert and their children and their children's children, and all carrying forward some piece of what started here. I turn back to Michael. That's legacy, not what you accomplish. What you set in motion that continues after you are gone. Michael picks up Klaus's notebook, opens it carefully. The pages are yellowed, the German script faded, but the drawings are still clear. Firebox designs, channel layouts, thermal mass calculations. I can't read German, he says. Neither could I say. But the drawings are clear, the numbers are universal, and now you have something that Klaus didn't give me. You have me, still alive, still able to teach, still able to answer questions. I pause. For a few more years anyway. I'm 67. Klaus died at 68. I'm on borrowed time. So if you want to learn, now is when you learn. He closes the notebook, looks at me directly. What do you want me to do, grandfather? I want you to choose, I say, really choose. Not let your father choose for you, not let fear choose, not let anger choose. I want you to decide what you want to build with your life, then build it. Factory work. Fine if that's what you choose, but choose it because it's right for you, not because someone who gave up on himself thinks you should give up too. I walk to the door open. It look out across the valley. The sun is setting now, painting the snow pink and gold. Same colors I saw the first night I spent in the cut bank, terrified and freezing and counting things to stay sane. The cabin will be yours someday, I say. I'm leaving it to you in my will. Not to your father, to you, because your father would sell it or tear it down and you might understand what it means. I turn back, but that's years away. Right now, today, I'm giving you those books, and I'm making you an offer. Michael waits. Stay here this spring and summer, Idisi. Learn what I know, surveying, architecture, stonework engineering. Learn to read land, understand structures, calculate loads and stresses in thermodynamics. Learn everything I can teach you in 6 months. Then in September, decide, factory or builder, employee or craftsman. If you choose factory, you'll go with more knowledge than you came with. If you choose building, you'll have foundation to build on. What about my father? What about him? You're 16. In 2 years, you're legally an adult. He can be angry for 2 years. You'll have 60 more years to be whoever you decide to be. Don't trade 60 years of your life for 2 years of his approval. Michael is quiet again. I can see him thinking, weighing, calculating. Good. Means he's taking it seriously. There's one more thing you need to know, I say, about the Johnsons, the family that froze. I sit back down, suddenly tired. 67 years of living catches up with you in moments like this. I never met them, I say. They died before I could teach them. That haunted me for years. Still does sometimes. The idea that if I just walked 4 miles south in December, knocked on their door, showed them the design they'd have lived, those kids would have grown up, would have had their own kids, would have built their own things. I look at Michael. That's the burden of knowledge. Once you have it, you're responsible for sharing it. Not because you'll get credit, because people die without it. The Johnsons died because Klaus's knowledge didn't reach them in time. How many other families died across Montana that winter because information moved too slowly? How many died the winter before, the decade before? I lean forward. That's why I'm giving you these books, why I'm offering to teach you. Because knowledge sitting in one old man's head dies with that old man. Knowledge spread across a generation survives that generation. I'm 67, you're 16. I have maybe 10 years left if I'm lucky. You have maybe 60. That's 60 years for you to pass forward what I teach you. 60 years for it to multiply and spread and save people I'll never meet. Michael picks up my father's wheelwright manual, opens it. The pages are even older than Klaus's notebook, the leather binding cracked and worn. My father's handwriting fills the margins. Notes about wood selection, spoke tension load calculations. A whole life of craft knowledge preserved. Your father wrote all this, Michael asks. Spent 30 years building wheels. Each one taught him something. He wrote it down so I wouldn't have to learn it the hard way. I pause. He died when I was 8, but his knowledge didn't die. It saved my life when I was 17. Helped me understand engineering principles that let me build this cabin. That manual is 60 years of craft wisdom, still working, still teaching, 40 years after the craftsman died. I walk to the window one more time. Full dark now. Stars coming out. Same stars that watched me nearly freeze in 1873. Same stars that will watch long after I'm gone. The cabin stands us, I say quietly, 79 years. The stones hold. The knowledge spreads. Klaus's voice echoes through valleys he never saw. My father's principles solve problems he never imagined. James's validation opens doors he never walked through. That's immortality. Not living forever, building things that work forever. I turn back to Michael. So, what's your answer? Stay and learn or go to the factory? He doesn't answer immediately. Good. Shows he's thinking it through. Finally, he says, if I stay, where do I sleep? I smile. First time I've smiled in days. Same room Samuel and Robert slept in. Same room where I've kept 2 beds ready for 30 years just in case someone needed them. Same room that's been waiting for the next person willing to learn. Michael stands, picks up both books, holds them against his chest. I'll stay. Teach me everything. Not everything, I correct. Everything I know. Big difference. Klaus knew things I never learned. My father knew things Klaus never learned. James knew things neither of them knew. You'll learn what I can teach, then you'll learn from others, then you'll discover things nobody taught you. That's how knowledge grows. I walk over, place my hand on his shoulder. But here's the deal. You work hard, 6 days a week, dawn to dusk. You learn not just the what, but the why. You ask questions. You challenge assumptions. You think like an engineer, not like someone following instructions. And when you know enough to teach, you teach. Free or paid doesn't matter. But you teach. That's the bargain. That's how this works. I understand, Michael says. Good. I squeeze his shoulder, let go. Tomorrow we start. Tonight you go home, tell your father your decision. He'll be angry. Let him be angry. His anger is about his choices, not yours. You're choosing to build. He chose to give up. That's on him, not you. Michael nods, heads for the door. At the threshold, he stops, turns back. Grandfather, why did you really bring me here? It wasn't just about the cabin, was it? Smart kid, seeing past the surface? No, I admit, it was about you seeing what's possible when someone refuses to stay thrown away. Your father is trying to throw you away, same as Jacob tried with me. Factory job for a fighter is just another way of saying you're not worth investing in, not worth teaching, not worth believing in. I brought you here so you'd know that's a lie. You're worth all of it, but only you can prove it. I can teach you. Can't make you learn. Can't make you build. Can't make you choose craft over convenience. I pause. I brought you here so you'd understand that being discarded doesn't define you. What you build after being discarded defines you. Jacob discarded me 79 years ago. This cabin is my answer to that. It's still standing, still warm, still teaching. Jacob is 79 years dead and forgotten. I'm still here, still relevant, still passing forward what matters. Michael nods slowly. The stones will hold. The stones will hold, I confirm. James's last words now becoming Michael's first lesson. He leaves and I'm alone again. The cabin settles around me, familiar creaks and sounds, the whisper of wind around the chimney cap, the soft tick of cooling stones. Home. Has been for 53 years, will be until I die. Then it will be Michael's, then someone else's. But always it will stand, always it will teach. I sit by the cachalophon one more time, place both hands on the warm stone, feel the heat that's been radiating from this thermal mass for 79 years. Heat from fires I built, heat from fires Samuel built, heat from fires Robert built, heat from fires James built. All of it absorbed into stone, released slow and steady, keeping the cold at bay. Tomorrow, I'll start teaching Michael. Surveying first. How to read topography. Understand drainage. See what land can support. Then architecture. How to design structures that work with nature instead of fighting it. Then stonework. How to select fit mortar build. Then engineering. How to calculate loads, stresses, thermal dynamics, all of it. Same progression Klaus used with me. Same progression my father used. Same progression that works because it builds foundation before adding complexity. Michael will learn fast. He's got the aptitude, the anger that drives learning, the need to prove something. Same things I had at 16. Same things that turned desperation into discipline and fear, into focus, weakness, into strength. By September, he'll know enough to choose wisely. Factory or craft, employee or builder, consumer or creator. The choice will still be his, but it will be an informed choice. That's all any teacher can provide. Information, context, options. The student has to choose, but I think I know what he'll choose. Saw it in his eyes when he held those books. Saw the same thing Klaus probably saw in my eyes 53 years ago. The hunger for knowledge that matters. The need to build things that last. The understanding that legacy is the only immortality humans get. The cabin will stand. The stones will hold. The knowledge will spread. Klaus to me to Margaret, Wilhelm, Samuel, Robert. Hundreds of others, them to thousands more, thousands to tens of thousands, compounding across generations like fire spreading through dry timber. That's the real heat, not the fire in the firebox. The fire of knowledge spreading from mind to mind, generation to generation, building and teaching and building again. I'm 67, Klaus's age. The age where you stop worrying about accomplishment and start worrying about legacy. What will remain when I'm gone? What will continue? What have I set in motion that doesn't need me to keep moving? The answer surrounds me. This cabin, these stones, the designs and territorial archives, the buildings Samuel and Robert created, the families who stayed warm, the knowledge still spreading. Enough. It's enough. I've done what Klaus asked, learned fast enough, worked hard enough, taught generously enough. The knowledge didn't die with him, won't die with me, will keep spreading long after my name is forgotten. That's legacy, not being remembered. Creating things that continue whether anyone remembers who created them or not. The cachalophan doesn't know my name, doesn't care, just keeps working, keeps radiating, keeps proving that thermal mass properly applied defeats cold more efficiently than combustion alone. Simple principle, profound implication, knowledge that saves lives. That's what I'm giving Michael tomorrow, not just technical skills. The understanding that what you know becomes what you build, becomes what you teach, becomes what survives you. Everything else is temporary. Buildings fall, money gets spent, reputations fade, but knowledge shared freely and taught well becomes immortal. The stones will hold, they always do.